Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, known to the world simply as Lula, was born on October 27, 1945, in Garanhuns, a poor rural area in the northeast of Brazil. His family were farmers who struggled with hunger and drought. There were many children in the house and very little money. There were no fancy toys, no private schools, and no comfortable city life. From the very beginning, Lula's world was marked by scarcity. But inside that world, his mother, Dona Lindu, taught him something more valuable than money: dignity, stubborn hope, and the belief that even the poor have the right to dream big. When Lula was still a small boy, his family joined a wave of migration from the dry northeast to the industrial region near São Paulo. The journey took days in the back of an open truck. The family arrived full of hope, but reality was harsh. They lived in cramped, simple rooms, sometimes sharing bathrooms with strangers. The streets were busy and noisy, and the air smelled of factories. Lula saw clearly that Brazil was a country of contrasts: rich factories on one side, crowded poor neighborhoods on the other. He was one of millions of children trying to help their families survive from day to day. Lula had very little formal education in the beginning. He quit school early to work and did not even learn to read properly until he was around 10 years old. As a child, he worked as a street vendor and Shoeshine boy, cleaning shoes on sidewalks and selling small items to passersby. The work was tiring and sometimes humiliating. Some customers were kind, others rude. But those long hours on the streets became an informal university. He learned how to talk to people, how to listen to their problems, and how to observe the way society treated the poor. Every coin he earned helped his family, and every day he spent working instead of playing made him older in spirit. In his early teens, Lula's life took a new direction. He found a job in a factory and later trained as a metal worker at an industrial training school. The factory was hot, loud, and dangerous. The machines were powerful, and an accident could change a life in a second. Lula himself lost part of a finger in a workplace accident. For many people, such an injury would be just another tragedy in a hard life. But for him, it was part of understanding the real price workers paid to keep factories running and economies growing. He saw that the people who sweated and risked their bodies often had the least voice in decision-making. As Lula grew older, he became active in the metalworkers union in the ABC industrial region near São Paulo. This was the heart of Brazil's car and heavy industry, full of plants owned by big companies. The 1970s were a time of military dictatorship in Brazil. Political freedoms were limited, and striking against big employers was dangerous. But the workers were frustrated. Wages were low, inflation was high, and many families could not afford a decent life. Lula quickly rose through the union ranks because he spoke like the workers, not like a distant official. He used simple words, strong images, and real stories. When he talked, workers felt that one of their own was finally speaking for them. Between 1978 and 1980, Lula led a series of huge strikes that challenged both the factory owners and the military government. Thousands of workers stopped machines and marched in the streets. The strikes were risky. The courts declared them illegal, and Lula was arrested for his role. He spent time in jail, separated from his family, and unsure what would happen next. But his imprisonment only increased his fame. Many Brazilians, even outside the factories, saw him as a symbol of resistance, a man who would not stay silent in the face of injustice. His voice carried the frustrations of an entire working class after the dictatorship began to weaken. And Brazil moved slowly toward democracy. Lula took his fight from the factory gates into politics. In 1980, together with intellectuals, activists, and other union leaders, he helped found the Workers' Party. Known as the PT, it was a new kind of party born from strikes, student movements, and church groups that wanted social justice, workers' rights, and democracy. Lula became its most famous face. He was not a polished elite politician. He still had the rough accent of the workers and the direct style of a union leader. For many poor Brazilians, this made him relatable and trustworthy. Lula ran for president several times before he finally won. In 1989, 1994, and 1998, he was a candidate and lost. Each defeat was painful. Critics said a former metalworker with little formal education could never become president of Brazil. After each election, he had to face his followers and say, "Not yet." But he refused to give up. He continued to tour the country, speak at rallies, listen to local leaders, and refine his message. Each campaign taught him something about what Brazilians hoped for, feared, and needed. Slowly, he gained experience not only as a fighter, also as a negotiator. In 2002, Lula ran for president again. This time, his image was slightly different. He kept his roots as a working-class leader, but he also assured businesses and the middle class that he would be responsible with the economy. He spoke about lifting the poor while keeping stability. His campaign slogan and his smiling face with a gray beard became symbols of change with caution. When the votes were counted, Lula finally won. The boy who had shined shoes on the street and lost a finger in a factory was now president of the Federative Republic of Brazil. Millions of people felt that, through him, poor and the workers had entered the presidential palace for the first time as president. Lula focused strongly on social programs and the fight against hunger and extreme poverty. His government launched and expanded policies like Bolsa Familia, which provided financial support to poor families in exchange for keeping their children in school and taking them for health checkups. Economic growth during his first years in office, helped by global demand for Brazilian products, allowed his administration to combine social spending with economic stability. Millions of Brazilians left extreme poverty and entered the consumer class. In many favelas and rural towns, people bought their first fridge, their first small car, or their first house. For them, Lula's presidency was not an abstract political event. It was a concrete change in daily life. At the same time, Lula became a prominent voice on the international stage. He spoke confidently at global meetings, representing Brazil as a rising power and the global South as a community that deserved respect. He pushed for closer cooperation between developing countries, helped create forums like BRICS, and argued that Brazil should play a bigger role in global decisions. For many supporters, seeing a former metal worker negotiating with presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs from around the world was proof that backgrounds do not define destiny. It showed that a person can come from the lowest economic class and still sit at the highest tables. However, Lula's story also includes difficulties and controversy. During and after his first time in office, Brazil was shaken by corruption scandals. Some members of his party and allies were accused and convicted of illegal schemes. Later, Lula himself was investigated and, for a time, convicted and imprisoned on corruption charges. His supporters claimed the cases were politically motivated. His critics said they proved that his movement had betrayed its original ideals. Lula spent more than a year in prison, watching his legacy being attacked and his future uncertain. Once again in his life, went from the heights of power to the experience of confinement and doubt. But his journey did not end in prison. Courts later annulled his convictions after finding serious problems in the cases. Lula was released and allowed to run for office again. Many people who had once celebrated his downfall were surprised to see him returning to the political field. In 2022, he ran once more for the presidency of Brazil, promising to defend democracy, reduce inequality, and protect the environment. It was a deeply polarized election, but he won, returning to the presidency after more than a decade away from the office. The Shoeshine boy had not just become president once, he had done it again. For your viewers, the story of riches in Lula's life is complex and powerful. On one side, it is a clear example of rising from poverty, a boy with almost no schooling who became a factory worker, then a union leader, then founder of a national party, and finally, president of one of the largest countries in the world. On the other side, it is a story that includes mistakes, accusations, and debates that continue today. This makes his journey more human and more real. He is not a perfect fairy tale hero. He is a man whose life reflects both the hope and the contradictions of modern politics. The deeper riches in Lula's path are not only the presidential sash or the official speeches. They are the experiences he collected, the feeling of hunger, the humiliation of street work, the risk and pain of factory life. The courage to lead strikes under a dictatorship, the loneliness of prison, and the strength to return to public life after defeat. All of these experiences gave him a unique ability to speak to the poor in a language they understand and to negotiate with the powerful from a place of hard-won confidence. For your audience, the lesson is simple but strong. Your starting point does not decide your finishing line. You can be a shoeshine boy, a street vendor, or a factory worker, and still build yourself into someone who changes history. But the story also warns that success brings new tests of integrity, humility, and honesty. Real riches are not just gaining power, but using that power to lift others and facing your failures honestly when you fall. Lula's life is a mirror in which anyone who has struggled, risen, and faced criticism can see a part of themselves.